You are listening to the GodArchy podcast, where we shove a crowbar between state and church. This is the spot where Christian faith intersects with libertarian anarchism and voluntaryism. I'm your host, Mike Maharry. In this episode, we're going to talk about strategies for liberty. Greetings, everyone. Welcome to the GodArchy podcast. Appreciate you taking time out of your busy day to listen to the show. Today, we're going to be talking with Spike Cohen. Spike was the 2020 Libertarian Party vice presidential candidate. He ran on a ticket with Joe Jorgensen. And Spike has been involved in libertarian activism for many, many years. And so I wanted to talk to him specifically about some strategy kind of things. First, communication. Spike is a really, really good communicator for liberty. And I wanted to ask him his views on what makes for good communication when it comes to telling people about liberty. So we talked a little bit about that, the good and the bad and the ugly as far as libertarian communication goes. And I also wanted to get his views on this ongoing debate that you get with anarchists and voluntarists about whether or not you should engage in the political system, electoral politics. There are some who hold the view that you shouldn't at all. You should take a more of an agorism route, meaning working to undermine the state, but not getting involved in the apparatus. And of course, there are others. Obviously, Spike was a vice presidential candidate. He doesn't hold that view. So we talked a little bit about that, and he and I are right on the same page when it comes to that. I think there is room for all kinds of strategies within the broader goal of making the world a more free place, a better place for human flourishing. So we talked about that. We also talk a little bit about his spiritual views and how they inform his views on liberty and politics. And you'll get to hear a little bit of how Spike came to be an anarchist, because we all have that story. So really good interview. I think you're going to enjoy it. Before we get into that, you're also going to get to hear about the new project that Spike is involved in. And I was really excited about this in particular because, again, it really dovetails with some of my some of the things that I'm passionate about, particularly local activism, single issue coalitions, and using that as a springboard to kind of talk about the broader philosophies of liberty. So all of that in this interview, I think you're really going to enjoy it. Before we get into that, I do want to tell you about my sponsor, Fox & Sons Coffee. Now, I'm not a coffee drinker, but my wife is a coffee drinker, and she's been drinking Fox & Sons Dark Roast. And the other day she told me that this is the best dark roast coffee that she's ever had. And that's saying a lot because she's tried a lot of different dark roast coffees. And of course, dark roast is tough from what I understand. Again, not a coffee drinker, but it's a hard to get that good flavor in a dark roast. And she said this coffee absolutely meets that bar. But if you don't like dark roast, do not fret, because Fox & Sons also has a light roast that is available. And again, take it from my wife, fantastic cup of coffee. I've watched my wife struggle to get good coffee at a reasonable price. Well, you're not going to be disappointed with Fox & Sons. Visit foxandsons.com. That's FOXNSONS.com. And you'll not only get delicious, whole bean, organically roasted coffee, you're also going to be supporting a cool family business. Steve Fox developed his love for coffee as a kid, going to work with his dad on Saturdays. Steve said he started this company both to honor his father and to have a business to pass along with the spirit of entrepreneurship to his sons. So again, check it out. I'm not sending you over empty-handed either. because we would not do that to you here on the GodArchy podcast. You can save 10% on any order over $20 with the promo code GodArchy. So head over to the website, get yourself some coffee if you're a coffee drinker, and support Fox and Sons Coffee. Steve is a great guy. He is a libertarian. He is a Christian, and it's really cool to see him launching this business. So check it out, foxandsons.com. Also, if you like what we're doing here at GodArchy, you like interviews with people like Spike and Scott Horton and Doc Dixon and Jeff Deist and all these people, Ron Paul I interviewed a while back. You can support the GodArchy podcast in two very important ways. Number one, please share the podcast, articles from GodArchy.org. Share them on your social media platforms. We are fighting a constant battle against the social media algorithms, and the more things are shared, the more they get exposed. Sharing, liking, it boosts the algorithm. So just take the moment, share the episode, share the articles, tell your friends about the show, help grow this show organically through the show's social media platforms that you're active on. And secondly, you can support the GodArchy podcast financially. There are two things that I'm not real good at. One of them is self-promotion, and another is asking people for money. Sales is really not my thing. I'm the guy that, when I had to sell candy, like in high school, you wouldn't want to buy some candy, would you? That's my sales strategy. Doesn't work real well. But, I do need that financial support to help GodArchy grow and become what the vision that I have would have it to be. And the more support that I get, the better I can, the more time that I can put into this endeavor. I really want to do a GodArchy book. I really want to do more articles. Writing is kind of my thing. I would love to do some video content, but I have to have the time to do it. And in order to have the time, I need to have the revenue to justify using that time. So you can support GodArchy. Just go to GodArchy.org. You will see on the toolbar a place where you can support GodArchy. You click on that. You'll see the options. It's a $5 a month or a $10 a month option there. And you can support on a monthly basis. And you get some bonuses for being a GodArchy supporter. Mainly, you get access to our members-only section of the website where you will find our mudslide rounds where we ask our guests fun questions. Sometimes the mudslide rounds are better than the interviews, I'm not going to lie. But supporters only. So a little bait there, a little enticement for you to support the show. You can also support the show through PayPal. I know there's some controversy about PayPal. If you don't want to use PayPal, that's cool. For the time being, I'm using it. But, there's a link on the website if you want to go that route. And if you would like to support the show using crypto, there is on the toolbar at GodArchy.org on the sidebar, there is a place where you can donate either Bitcoin or Ethereum to the show and support us that way. So a lot of ways to support the show. And what we do is we pass on some of what we get, 40%, to another organization or individuals that are in need. This month, we've supported antiwar.com, and I think they had matching funds, so that's pretty cool. So please, check out our supporting listeners. Crush that support button. Help me grow GodArchy. Also, one final thing, one little more piece of business. A little more piece of business? Yes, a little more piece of business before we get to the interview. Sign up for the GodArchy email. info@godarchy.org is my email address. You can write me. But if you go to the website, you will see where you can sign up for our mailing list. I don't send a lot of emails, once a week, every other week at most. Well, every other week, once a week at most. And I will share show links. I will share article links, things that you might miss on social media. This is the best way to get around the stupid social media algorithms, is simply sign up for the email and you'll get that stuff right in your inbox. I promise I will not spam you, and I will not, sell your information to somebody else. So go ahead and do that as well. So with that, let's get on to our talk with Spike Cohen. Again, Spike was the 2020 vice presidential nominee for the Libertarian Party, a fantastic communicator for liberty, and I think you're going to enjoy the talk that we had. All right, Spike, thank you so much for coming on the GodArchy podcast. How you doing, buddy?
I'm doing good, Mike. Thanks for having me on, man. This is my first time, right?
I think it is, yeah. And this is actually GodArchy 2.0. Well, it's not 2.0. We're on like 2.7 now, but I stopped for about a year when my mom was sick and then rebooted.
Oh, okay. Awesome.
And
well, I'm looking forward to being on.
I'm going to tell you this on live on the air. You probably don't remember this, but after my mom passed away, you actually messaged me on Facebook and just offered your condolences. And that meant a lot to me that you took the
I do. I remember that.
I thought that was very cool.
I do.
So,
I remember.
Thank you.
Yeah. Absolutely, man.
So I usually start off the show just kind of a general query. I like to find people's kind of, how'd you get to libertarianism? Because most of us weren't born libertarians. I'm always curious to know kind of where you came from and how you got to where you are now.
Sure. So I actually, I was a neocon. And I should back up by saying I've always had somewhat of a libertarian streak, certainly in my personal life. My parents learned very quickly, rather than trying to tell me, do this because we told you so, they would actually reason with me and explain, you should do this and here's why and da, 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 da. And that would work if they would say, if you do this, then, here's what's going to happen. Or even something like, if you do this, then then we can do, you can have this as a reward or whatever.
Right.
And I actually, when it would be done that way, I was actually a relatively good kid. It was when, someone would say, do this because I'm telling you to. Things went terribly awry, which will be a shock to many that I didn't do well in the public school system as a result of that. But,
yes.
When I turned, so 9/11 happened when I was 19 years old.
Okay.
And, I didn't have the perspective of everything that led up to 9/11. I didn't know about I didn't have a real concept of the U.S. history of the U.S. government in the Middle East and Operation Ajax and the occupation of Muslim holy lands and, the relationship between Israel and the U.S. and the Palestinians and Sykes-Picot and which obviously that wasn't the U.S., but led to the U.S. involvement there and the relationship with the Saudis and all of that. So the Mujahideen in Afghanistan. I didn't know any of that. Right. What I knew was that I was watching the Twin Towers burn down and, had heard of other attacks, in the Pentagon and another possible one that had been thwarted in Pennsylvania, and the possibility that there were going to be many more, that this was just the opening salvo of God knows how many other attacks, and that it was being done by this Osama bin Laden guy, and that I bought the media, the corporate media line that was coming from the government, hook, line, and sinker, that they hated us for our freedoms. Yes. We were just so darn free over there. And they mentioned the fact that, that there was brief mention in the Al-Qaeda manifestos and fatwas about Western women wearing tight jeans or whatever. Right. But putting aside everything else, their actual reasons for doing it, it was the tight jeans and our vulgar music, or I don't even know what I thought it was, but our freedoms. We were just so darn free, and Sauron was coming to take it from us, and I bought it. Yeah. I bought it, and I bought the ensuing years of propaganda of, we needed to invade Afghanistan. We didn't need to negotiate with Mullah Omar. We needed to topple them because they're either with us or against us. Right. And I bought the concept of, Saddam might have had some loose connection to Al-Qaeda, and he might have been developing nuclear weapons, but really we should have taken him back in the 90s. And, and frankly, the underlying thing is all those people can't be trusted. We need to kill them to protect our peace and freedom. And I feel foolish saying things now like, we need to spread peace and democracy. And no matter how many millions of people we have to kill and how many democratically elected regimes we have to overthrow in the process. The whole thing sounds absurd now, but I believed it. I fully 100% bought into all the lies. And so when people okay, well, there you go. So we're in good company.
We're on the exact same page. Yeah, except I was older than you and probably should have known better. But
I at least have that I was a kid on my... Right. Oh, and also I was on a lot of drugs. So I also was a drug addict from 13, 14 until my early 20s. So I can also say I actually was a Republican who smoked weed. But I wasn't a libertarian. Yeah. I wasn't a libertarian. I was an actual Republican who smoked weed. Mm-hmm. And so... when I was being told all this stuff, I bought it. And when I would hear, it was actually Matt Kibbe with his Freedom Works emails. It's funny, we're friends now, but the emails he would send saying basically from a conservative perspective, if you want a smaller government, if you want, government to leave you alone, you're not going to get that. If you want all this freedom we keep hearing about, you're not going to get it from an ever expanding government that's, waging endless imperial warfare around the world and spying on everything you're doing here and, arresting citizens and putting them in, detainment permanently without trial. That's not how it works. Yeah. And I didn't want to believe it. When Ron Paul would say it, I didn't want to believe it. And when they started making predictions about how Iraq would go, how Afghanistan would go, the revelations we'd find out along the way, we keep finding out that the government had lied to us, aren't any safer and all of that stuff. I didn't want to believe it. And I kind of got disabused by reality over time. And at one point I became really extremely angry. Mm-hmm. And I realized that the reason I was angry was because I was wrong and I knew it. Yeah. And I thought, well, here's an easy way to fix that. Maybe I can stop being wrong. And so that kind of led me on the path of going, okay, I got here ad hoc, but it was because I was a kid. Right. But now I'm in my mid-20s. I'm not a kid anymore. Let's look at what is it I actually believe. I know that I really don't like this idea of just, government telling me what to think, but what is it I think? And so I went on this, I'm pretty much any anti-authoritarian thing I could read. I even read Marx. I read Mises. Yeah. I read Marx. I read Bakunin. I read Hess. I read Spooner. I read Hayek. I read Bastiat. I read all sorts of stuff. Yeah. And what that led me on very quickly was from realizing I was a recovering neocon and thinking, well, maybe I'm a constitutionalist, leading me ultimately to becoming an anarcho-capitalist. That's really the journey that I went on there. And I've I would say over the past few years, maybe some of the finer points of things I believe have changed over time, but I kind of reached my Super Saiyan final form ANCAP a few years back.
Yeah, it's interesting. We had very, very similar paths and also kind of ran through that constitutional, I've got my Constitution books behind me that I've written. So, but yeah, it's interesting.
I was going to ask, did you read Spooner? No Treason?
I have. Yeah. Okay. I have. It's been a while. In fact, here's something most people don't know. Spooner wrote a very interesting treatise in the 1850s that was basically talking about how do you preserve the Constitution. And it's very much the 10th Amendment Center philosophy that we're still pushing today, that the idea is that you resist, that you can't expect words on paper to limit a government. The only way you can limit a government is people refuse to do what the government tells it to do. So
exactly.
And that's why I'm still doing that work, because I think it's an important message and it's a way to reach folks who aren't where we are from a philosophical standpoint. Another interesting point that you made, for me, the war thing was the last thing to go, because I grew up in a very pro-military family. My grandfather was in the Army from before World War II all the way through Vietnam. And so that was hard for me to let go of all of that, kind of cultural baggage that comes with that.
Yeah.
I remember reading an article or an essay that James Madison wrote, and he talked about the fact you cannot have liberty if you're in a state of perpetual warfare. And he talked about debt and taxes and executive power and all the things. He predicted it, 250 years ago. So
Yeah, absolutely. I believe the treatise that you mentioned from 1850. I believe that's the same. Is that the same one that gave the justification? You made the constitutional argument that the Constitution did not support slavery.
Correct. That was
Okay, so
that was the whole purpose of that essay.
right. And so that was that heavily, I'm sure you've probably written books about it, heavily influenced Frederick Douglass,
Right.
who previously had believed that the Constitution enshrined slavery. And so he was an anti-constitutionalist.
Right.
He read that treatise, went on to become one of the greatest constitutionalist warriors of his time. And it's incredible what your words can do. He later writes No Treason.
Right.
120 years later, this schmuck, I'm pointing at myself, reads No Treason thinking I'm a constitutionalist. And really just reading the first chapter, I'm like, oh no. And reading through it and, using basically the concept, the English common law concepts of consent and contract to make an argument that none of us agreed to or consented to this. And that therefore, this is there is no such thing as consent of the governed, really just destroying every last shred of minarchism left in me. And I remember the longer I read it, and it was weird because I was having a similar dissonance. I wouldn't even say it was a dissonance, but it was this almost this morning experience of how am I going to tell my family I'm an anarchist? Just reading this and realizing that there was nothing here that I disagreed with at all, that I could refute at all. And by the time I read the end of it, I thought, I guess I got to tell my wife. It was like this, it was the weirdest experience I had. It was there was no problem accepting what he was saying. It was figuring out how I was going to share this with the world.
Yes.
That I was a crazy anarchist. And so I actually I told my wife, and obviously, and I'm like, how do I tell my parents? And it was just it was the weirdest experience to go through. And it was just the funniest thing.
So what'd your wife say?
So it was interesting. My wife was pretty accepting. She had some questions, but they were more along the lines of you don't want to burn things down or riot or anything. I'm like, no. I'm like, no, that's a misconception. No, I'm very peaceful. It's actually the opposite. I want to end wars. I want to end violence. I think this message is actually one about peace and all of that. But she was pretty cool. But she's also used to me going on philosophical and metaphysical journeys anyway. So I think this was just my newest one. So yeah.
Yeah, my wife kind of took the journey with me. So we kind of ended up at the. She's not nearly as interested in philosophy and politics and those kind of things as I. But it's funny because the thing that she gets the most worked up now is the war stuff, which is kind of cool, really. She just the war machine just absolutely drives her batty. But speaking of metaphysical, I know that you were raised in a Jewish household. How does your spiritual views, how have those evolved, and how does that reflect in your political philosophy?
So interestingly enough, when I first kind of came into this journey of being a libertarian and then an anarchist, it was actually I was raised in the Messianic Jewish background. And it was that helped kind of cement my belief in libertarianism and minarchy and then later anarchy, the idea that I'm supposed to be ruled by God. I'm not supposed to be ruled by any man. And you look at the stories in the Bible. You look at the Israelites who had essentially not necessarily anarchy, but they had the rabbis telling them the way they should live and them making decisions based on that.
Right.
And then at one point they go, well, no, we want a king so we can have prestige like the other nations.
Huge mistake.
Huge mistake. And it wasn't like they weren't warned. Literally, God is telling them, all you need is me. You don't need to ask for this. Here's all the lists out all the terrible things that are going to happen if you want a king. No, that's fine. We want a king. Okay, well, you wanted a king, you got a king. And even gave them great kings, but it led to everything that all the ruin that they had as a result. Now, later on, again, going on my various journeys that I'm on, I started to move away from believing in any of the Abrahamic definitions of what God is as this sort of top-down monarchistic God. certainly don't fault anyone for believing it. My wife is still a devout Christian to this day. It just was no longer something I believed.
Sure.
And so for a while I considered myself not necessarily an atheist, because I didn't know or even suspect that there was no God. I felt like there had to be a purpose to all of this. When I look at the model showing how the universe was created, I always think, okay, but why and by whom and how, as opposed to just, okay, this mechanical thing happened. But it always didn't seem to make sense to me that out of this mechanical, uncaring sort of blip that happened are these creatures that for some reason are hyper focused on finding purpose and fulfillment, and are in this desperate search to find out what this is all about. Yeah. It didn't seem to make sense that would come from a otherwise completely uncaring, largely, I guess, pulse-driven universe. It didn't make sense to me. And so in recent years, I've stumbled upon, and it actually started as working on stress relief stuff. And I kind of stumbled upon ideas behind Taoism and Buddhism and even Hinduism. And I've over time, I've come to appreciate the idea that we are actually more apertures. We're all part of the same thing and are really just apertures of the same universe, God, whatever you want to call it, experiencing itself. That seems to, I don't know that that's even true. I suspect that in the same way that our gut microbiota couldn't possibly perceive or understand the greater reality that they're a part of, I suspect that we are in a similar situation where we couldn't possibly even understand what it is. Right. But regardless of what it is, that the more that I've spent trying to figure that part of what I believe out, the more that I keep coming back to the common thread that seems to be in all belief systems. And it's that whatever period of existence, life, perception, awareness, consciousness, whatever you want to call it, is exceedingly short. And the best way that we can, and that the most important thing is for us to demonstrate, is to have gratitude for that moment. That we have, and to demonstrate that in the way that we treat ourselves and others. And that, if anything, continues to that even more buttresses my beliefs when it comes to being libertarian. Right. I don't want to try to exert my force on someone else or my belief on someone else, because only you could possibly know as well as anyone what you need. Only your community could know what your community needs. Right. So from a completely different way of thinking about how the world works and the universe works and what it's all about, I came to the same conclusion in terms of, I guess the only main difference is before it was more about no one should rule over me. I ultimately am the top human who decides for me. Now it's almost more me thinking I shouldn't be deciding for you. Yeah. So I guess the focus is less on me and more on others.
That's pretty cool. Yeah. And it's so many world religions come back down to the idea of I mean, love God, whatever you may perceive that to be, and love your neighbor. Right. You know? And yes. Really, and that's exactly. And that was, that was a big part of. I grew up I didn't grow up. I became through friends and just through my walk of life. I became a very, I was that neocon, but I was also that religious right neocon, and for me, a big part of my journey was starting to come to a point, okay, Mike, you need to reconcile your political views, your spiritual views, because I had all these different things that really weren't coherent, when you really stopped and thought about it. And that was a big part of me starting to reject war, was like, if I believe this idea of love your neighbor, I can't bomb them, and really, I think if we could just, setting aside religious dogma, doctrine, orthodoxy, whatever, if we could come to the point where we could love our neighbors and treat each other the way we want to be treated, I mean, imagine what this world would look like. And that's really what we're striving for when we talk about a voluntary society.
Absolutely, 100%. I did a lot of different studying of different faiths and different beliefs. Now, I'll admit, most of it was limited to the various Abrahamic faiths, and I guess maybe one step out from that. So, kind of starting with Christianity, Judaism, Islam, and then going out to like Baha'i or Zoroastrianism or something like that. None of those seem to necessarily make sense to me. But atheism, the idea of like, and no disrespect to atheists, but it never truly made sense to me. There is this mechanical, uncaring universe, and here we are constantly trying to figure out what it's all about. Like that it doesn't make sense. It does not intuitively make sense that would happen. Yeah. And so as I looked more into the Eastern stuff, that seemed to make more sense. But what was very interesting was I remember, and I forget if I was listening to someone or reading someone, and they gave this whole deep explanation, and this person is a Hindu, and they gave this very deep explanation of how, you know, there are all these stories about Krishna and about Ram and about I'm trying to remember the different names there, but like this whole drama that they've created. Mm-hmm. And then they say, yeah, but if you strip it away, none of that actually matters because that's all just drama. The real truth is that you are the Atman, the one aperture of that is a part of just like all things and people are of the Brahman, which is all things in one, the whole works, and that you're just living out your dharma, which is your part of the drama and all of that stuff. And they explained the whole thing, and then they said, but it could all not be true. We have no way of knowing. Yeah. And that was probably one of the most profound things I ever heard, because it was kind of a permission that this person was giving that we really don't know. Yeah. And then in that moment, I started thinking of all of the other faiths and belief systems I had read. And I realized all of them, again, have the same, distill them down. What is the common thread? Our life, this moment that we have, our perception, our consciousness, this moment of being an aperture, whatever you want to call it, it's so short. Right. It happens so quickly in a relative on the scale of the universe. It's a blip. We're no different than some fly that lives for 24 hours on the greater scale of things. Right. Except to the extent that we experience it as individuals. And what that told me was, what a precious moment we have to be here and to experience what we're experiencing. And whichever of those beliefs you believe, the common thread I saw was it's very, very, very finite, a relative blip. And we should be grateful for that blip, that time that we have, and that the only way that we can truly demonstrate or manifest it is how we treat ourselves and how we treat others. And others doesn't necessarily just mean other people. Our entire environment. How do we treat the people, the animals, and the environment that we are within to demonstrate our gratitude for the time that we're here? Yeah. And that was what allowed. That's when I went from being sort of a inward-looking individualist to an outward-looking individualist. Yeah. Instead of seeing myself and my own ego and my own self-ownership and all of that, I started seeing that in others and in the individual beauty that each person has, and how much I want to demonstrate my appreciation in how I treat them on their journey. Yeah. And I certainly fall short of that very often. Right. But the more I found that I was doing that, the more I found myself at peace in all things. Yeah, that's pretty profound. See, I told you this podcast goes where it goes. I do want to talk a little bit about your work, and a couple of things in particular. One thing I wanted to kind of touch on is libertarian messaging, and I think you're really good at it. You've got a great Twitter game, which I have to confess, my Twitter game is lame. I don't know. I can write a book, can't write a tweet. But tweets are hard, man. You got to get into it. Yeah. But 140 characters or whatever. Yeah, exactly. But I guess, what do you think is the key, as somebody who's doing this? What is the key to effective libertarian messaging? What are we doing? Or maybe let's put it this way: what are we doing right? And we can look at this, not just through the party, but maybe more broadly through the movement. But you can focus on the party since that's kind of your vehicle. And what are we doing wrong? Sure. So I would say, first of all, the best thing we can do. And I'm going to get back to your question of what are we doing right and what are we doing wrong. But I want to put up a little bit of a preface here. Yeah. We often look at libertarian messaging or political messaging as though it is substantively different from any other type of messaging. Right. And it really isn't. The same way that you get someone to accept, your ideas that are political in nature are the same way that you get people to accept your ideas that are, say, religious or metaphysical in nature, which is the same way that you get people to accept your ideas which are personal or relational in nature, which is the same way that you get people to accept your ideas that are commercial in nature. Like all messaging is messaging. I like to tell people politics is sales, is friendship, is preaching, they're all the same thing.
Yeah.
And so with that preface in mind, I think that we do well whenever our messaging demonstrates the best way to reach people. And the best way to reach people is to recognize who they are as individuals. People typically as individuals, when they hear any new idea, the further that idea is from what they currently believe or from what they perceive it to be, how far they perceive it to be from what they currently believe, the more likely their cognitive defenses are up. The further you as a person, party, political belief system, organization, whatever, are from what they perceive to be themselves and their community and their identity and all of that, the further you as an individual or an organization, they perceive you to be from that, the higher their cognitive defenses are. Yeah. And so what I have found, and this is why when people tell me, libertarians ask me, what's the most important book for libertarians to read? And I go, well, if you're already a libertarian, you already know a lot about libertarianism. So I'd say the best book for you to read is How to Win Friends and Influence People by Carnegie. Yeah. But what that talks about, and many others have said this as well, we need to whatever extent we reach people where they are, from their concerns, from their precepts, from empathizing with what it is that matters to them in good faith. And if it's an in-person thing, as close to them physically as you can, like going to their spaces, asking if you can go to their events to hear what they have to say. And to the extent that we actually listen to what they have to say, so that when we're messaging to them, it's reflecting the things that they're already saying. And to whatever extent we then take that and use that as the vehicle to explain how we got here and how we can fix it and take them on the journey to libertarian solutions, I think we do the best. The reason that my Twitter, my Facebook, my whatever, my YouTube videos, why they often sound different than a lot of other libertarian stuff is because I don't start necessarily with the philosophy. And libertarians, we tend to do that.
Yeah, we like our philosophy a lot.
We do. It's every person receives information with some combination of intellect, intuition, and emotion. What do I think about this? How do I intuitively feel about it? And how do I emotionally feel about it? And it's different from person to person. Each person, it's different from subject to subject, day to day, what mood they're in, whatever. Generally speaking, libertarians tend to be a little bit higher on the intellect side, a little bit lower on the emotional side, although not as much as we like to pretend. We're not these cold, hard facts, don't care about your feelings people. We're not robots, but with way less intuition. We are often not picking up on social cues, and it shows. So to whatever extent we are making those connections, we do well. And when we fail is when we're not doing that. A recent controversy that happened was when the Libertarian Party of New Hampshire's Twitter put up a tweet about on the anniversary of John McCain's death. And it was a picture of Meghan McCain crying over her father's grave, or over the casket on the day of his funeral, and it said "Happy Holidays." Now, if you're already a libertarian and you already hate war and you already see John McCain as the disgusting warmonger who has killed, responsible, his policies are responsible for the deaths of countless millions of people and the suffering of tens of millions of others, the devastation, the loss of thousands of American service lives, and many more still continuing to suffer from all sorts of physical and mental trauma, many of them taking their own lives or dying from preventable illnesses. And all that came from the type of things John McCain spent decades advocating for. Thank God he was never president. We probably would have nuked Iran. I mean, absolute monster of a human being. But if you don't know that, and if you have, well, let me put it this way, nothing that the Libertarian Party of New Hampshire has ever tweeted, including that tweet and every other bad tweet or good tweet or anything, nothing they've ever tweeted combined will ever do as much damage as John McCain did with his policies. And the reason that the vast majority of people don't recognize John McCain as the monster he is because corporate media have created this. They've humanized him. They've made him he was a veteran and a war hero and a family
prisoner
man.
of war, man.
And his family, prisoner of war, and he was a good guy and he did his best. And by gosh, his family loved him. And that tweet fed directly into that narrative.
Yeah.
And so when the reaction that happened, when people across the political spectrum, including a lot of libertarians, went, what the hell was that?
Yeah.
Why are you beating up on Meghan McCain and all of that? And then, a lot of libertarians who supported that messaging were saying, why are you defending a war criminal? This guy was an absolute monster and all. Well, because they didn't know.
Yeah.
And because you didn't start the conversation about how John McCain was a war criminal. You started the conversation as, hey, look at this lady crying over her dad's death. Ha ha.
Yeah.
And so that would be an example of, even though I understood the motivation behind it, and I personally, I look at that and go, yeah, well, that's nothing compared to what McCain did.
Right.
I see why it got the reaction that it did, because it didn't say, how do we reach people where they are?
Right.
And the example I gave of what they could have done on his anniversary is have a picture of her crying by her dad's coffin, and another photo of a drone bombing that's taken out a family or something like that, and say something along the lines of 3 years ago to however many years ago today, John McCain died in the comfort of his home, surrounded by his loved ones who were able to mourn him in peace and quiet. Unfortunately, millions of victims of John McCain's policies didn't get to weren't given that same luxury or something like that. It's still controversial. It's still going to set some people off, but it reaches people on something like, wow, what a terrible thing
you kind of put those two things into the same context. That's I when I saw that tweet, I was and as somebody who loathed John McCain, still loathes John McCain, yes. I guess, I still saw that tweet and I was like, and for me, where it hit me is somebody that's still, and I'm still mourning the death of my mom. That's where it hit me. It's like, I'm putting myself in the position of this daughter that is mourning her dad. Yeah. I don't care who he was to the rest of the world. To her, that's her daddy,
Yeah.
And so it's dehumanizing. Which, I get it, but
and I get it too. But that's very powerful what you said. The monster John McCain is,
right?
But you're also a son who recently mourned his mother, and so even though you knew the monster John McCain is, and you probably also knew that Meghan McCain has very often defended her father's policies, and she's a grown woman, which means she's not obviously not near responsible or anything like that. But she also advocated for those things, or at least defended them. You saw a child mourning their parent. Yeah. So even someone who gets the idea behind why they were saying it still hit you the wrong way. Yeah. And so that's an example. And that's not to beat up on LP New Hampshire or anything else. It's just one of the more recent examples.
Yeah, talking about the messaging. And from the other side of that is as the father of a daughter, and knowing that relationship, I've screwed up a lot, but my daughter still loves me,
Yes.
And on the flip side of that, I don't agree with every decision that she's made in her life, but I love that girl, and there's not anything that she can do to change that, So it's putting, I say this all the time, politics just in general is kind of toxic, just the whole thing, because we're dealing with a system that is fundamentally based on violence, force, and coercion. So it's going to be toxic regardless. And we can talk, actually, my next question will go into how we approach that. But
sure,
I think we always need to remember that we don't want to sacrifice our humanity on the altar of politics.
Yep, absolutely. I agree with that. The problem with politics, and it's still, I want to be clear on this because I've said this before, and people think that I'm advocating for dictatorship, and I'm not. I'm advocating for a completely free market, decentralized society.
Right.
In a system where you have a true dictatorship or autocracy, where Kim Jong-un or Xi Jinping or someone like that is making all the decisions, then the people are largely just subjects to that.
Right.
In a democratic system where you sort of crowdsource the tyranny to some extent, or at least give the appearance of crowdsourcing the tyranny, what ends up happening is if I have a difference of opinion from you, and both of us don't just say, okay, I live my way, you live your way, but actually I think the government should make you live my way because I think it's right, or I think your way is a threat to me, or whatever. We're now no longer two people that have differing sets of opinions on how to live our life. Right. We're now enemies. And because even if we're not, because we're doing our violence by proxy, one of us is going to win. Those elections are going to have consequences potentially. And police officers will, to the extent that they have to, show up and make you do what I said or make me do what you said. So this is war. Mm-hmm. And so you look at the politics we have now. It is. I'm surprised people aren't more at each other's throats than they currently are. I think honestly, the reason they aren't more at each other's throats is because they don't realize the stakes. They don't realize just how bad this could be. And I think a lot of times the ones who do realize the stakes are the ones that end up, rioting and doing stuff like that, or engaging in terrible things to their political opponents, shooting them up and things like that. It's because they realize this is war and how bad it can be. Yeah. And so, I think that something that libertarianism offers is the idea that, and Larry Sharp says this, you could be as progressive or as conservative as you want, as long as no one tries to change how you are and you don't try to change how anyone else is, then we could all live together in harmony. Right. That's something that liberty offers, is us not trying to use the state as a proxy to make each other live that way, and the ensuing warfare that never ends as a result of it.
Yeah, absolutely. So that leads me to kind of the next question. As anarchists, there's an ongoing debate that you'll see between those who think we shouldn't involve ourselves in the political process at all. And this is very prominent in Christian libertarianism, where the idea is that our allegiance is to God, and what they're doing over here really is not our sphere of concern. And then
you have but Christ,
right. And then you have the and kind of that agorist mentality of if this is an institution of violence, then we should reject it completely. And then obviously there's the other side of that coin that, okay, this thing existed as it is, we need to engage it to try to limit the damage it's doing as much as possible. Obviously, as somebody that's involved in the Libertarian Party, you've kind of taken that second approach. I'm just interested in your thoughts on kind of that tension between, engaging in a system that is, again, founded on violence, force, and coercion, and and I guess the other side of it being, it is what it is. How can we engage it in a way that maybe mitigates the damage?
Yes. So I'm glad you brought this up. So I've been asked this a few times, a few different ways, but my favorite way of it being asked was I was at an anarchist event, and I'm trying to remember if this was asked at Float Fest or Anarchon, but whichever it was, I had someone and they said, I'm a fan of your social media, but I'm an anarchist and I'm a non-voting, non-politically involved anarchist. Here's your chance to convince me to get involved in politics. And I said, no. I said,
That's awesome.
I said, here's the thing. I said, look, I presume, and I'll expand this out to talking about this, but I said to this person, I said, I presume that the reason you aren't involved in politics is some combination of you don't believe that you should use your vote as a proxy of violence to enforce your will against others, whatever your will is, and or that you think that the political system is largely rigged, that there's no use to doing it, and all voting or being involved politically does is to give credence or lend legitimacy to that system. Mm-hmm. And they were like, yes, it's actually both of those things. I said, okay, well, good. I want more people to be like you. So, if there are more people out there who say, you know what, I'm done with this, I don't want to be involved in it, and I don't think my will shouldn't be enforced on someone else, that's good. I actually don't have a problem with that. All of us, I think that, and I also don't think that politics, electoral politics, I do think it's one of the ways that we can fight against tyranny. Voting is violence. Politics is violence.
Yeah,
when I
absolutely.
am encouraging people to vote or to a certain way or not vote a certain way or to support this candidate or to support this measure or initiative or to oppose this candidate or this measure or initiative, I am essentially encouraging people to engage in a form of proxy defensive violence. It is violence. It is defensive violence.
Right.
Now, the question then becomes, okay, fine, it's defensive violence. How useful is it?
Right.
Well, the thing is, I don't think it is the main way of accomplishing things. I think the main way of accomplishing things is by building a culture of liberty, of people who want to be free, who want that freedom and that responsibility and all that comes with it, and who don't want to have all of their responsibilities and thoughts put as a proxy on someone who does not have their best interests at heart, which is the state. I think that's probably the best way to do it. There's also the agorist route, the counter economics route, building market alternatives, prefiguring anarchy and not, waiting for the state to crumble and then figure out how to do it, showing people how it can be done without it. Like, for example, cryptocurrency, and so many other blockchain based and mutual aid. I mean, there's all sorts of things that are being done on the agorism realm. There are all sorts of different things, and art and music. There are so many ways that their individual talents can be used to spread freedom, to spread the message of freedom, to spread the ideas of freedom and actual freedom, implement things that are better than what government is providing. My talent is talking to people, messaging to people, and reaching people where they are. That's always been my talent. When I had my businesses, that was my talent. It's my main talent now. And I'm also good at building organizations and directing and things like that. But my top talent is on the messaging side. And so the way that I use politics is the way I use electoral politics and the political messaging that I do is twofold. Number one, it's to encourage people to use their vote, if they're going to use it in a defensive manner instead of an offensive manner. Right. But the other thing is that if you knew me 3 years ago as Spike Cohen, the guy who's about to start or had just started a podcast and was known by dozens of people or hundreds of people, whatever, and now you know me as Spike Cohen, former VP candidate who's known by people around the world and is, followed by hundreds of thousands, monthly reach of 50 million, blah, blah, blah. I'm the same person. I'm literally the exact same person. All that changed was that I got the undue deference that comes from running for a big political office. I'm no longer Spike Cohen. I'm now, or just Spike Cohen. I'm Spike Cohen, former Libertarian VP candidate who came in third place for vice president in all 50 states. And everything that comes with that, it doesn't actually mean anything. But to millions of people around the world, millions of people just in the US alone, that actually means something. Okay, well, we don't think it means anything, but I'll sure as heck use it. I'm leveraging that to give people a message in a way that they never would have accepted it otherwise, and something they would have never otherwise have heard. Now, with that said, I increasingly see the limits of how that can be done within a political party, because as soon as someone hears the such and such party, their minds turn off. Even if they're already a libertarian, they don't want it. It's like, oh, political parties, I'm not really political. And so what I put up my time into now is the organization I started earlier this year. I began it as a proof of concept last year, but I officially launched it this year. And that's my organization, You Are the Power. And the purpose of You Are the Power is using single issue localized activism to reach people where they are in something that they already need help with and already agree with us on what needs to be done, get them excited and organized to be able to fight for justice on that thing, and then use that opportunity that we have with them to reach them with the broader message of liberty. If we're going to grow a culture of liberty, it's going to come from people who not only understand liberty, but are excited to actually implement liberty and fight for liberty. And so that's what I'm doing with You Are the Power.
That is awesome. So that is you're talking right up my alley, and I'll tell you a story that you'll enjoy about dates all run together. It's probably 2018 or so. I got involved in some local surveillance activism in my hometown at the time, Lexington, Kentucky, and surveillance has always been with the 10th Amendment Center. That was one of my key policy areas, so I know a lot about it. And I won't get into the whole nuts and bolts of it, but ultimately I ended up getting sued by the city of Lexington over open records requests. And doing that work, I got to know more people outside of the libertarian sphere who were concerned about surveillance than I would have ever gotten to know doing some kind of libertarian political activism. And one of my favorite stories from this is after I got sued, I was fortunate to have a lot of connections with the ACLU, and the ACLU of Kentucky represented me in this lawsuit. And one afternoon, I was having lunch with the policy director there at the Kentucky ACLU, and we were just talking. First, we were talking about the case and specific things about surveillance, and of course, as conversations do during a lunch, kind of started wandering into broader political philosophy and whatnot. And so we're getting up after good conversation, and she looks at me and goes, "You know what? I might be an anarchist." So you make those connections, and it's funny because I was like, but it's true.
Yeah.
I love that strategy because it's a single issue thing. You can put aside all of the other baggage. We don't have to be progressives or conservatives or even libertarians. We just care about this thing.
This one thing, yeah.
Right. And then and in the first place, you're making some progress on that one thing. Right.
On that one thing.
If you can win some battles on that one thing, but then you are building those relationships and you're able to talk to people and they get to know. When they hear libertarian, they don't hear New Hampshire Twitter feed anymore. They hear, oh, that's that guy Mike Meharry I had lunch with.
Yes.
So that's a
100%.
I love it.
So I actually, when I first started formulating last year what I was going to do now that I had grown up and the campaign was over,
right.
It was the 10th Amendment Center that I actually looked at and was one of many, a few of the groups that I looked at. And I remembered Michael Bolden talking about something like tenter cells, the idea of having like local activists who would, on sort of single issue activism, sort of applying the ideas behind the 10th Amendment of ideas being implemented locally. And I started and I thought, well, that's a kick in the pants. And so that was actually a big part of the inspiration. So I have to thank you and Michael for that. That was a big inspiration, part of the inspiration for behind You Are the Power, is the idea of, wow, there are already a bunch of people who are being run roughshod over by their local governments. They have no idea how to fight back. They intuitively know something is wrong with this arrangement, but they can't quite put their finger on, well, it's injustice. I know that, but what are we going to actually do about it and how do we stop it? What a great opportunity for us to reach someone who's already looking for help. Right. And so we've already been able to help that in multiple places in Bourbon, Indiana, we're doing it in Gastonia, North Carolina, in Manatee County, Florida, in Columbus, Ohio, Sacramento, California. We've got a bunch of other stuff brewing right now. We're now now that we're official and receiving donations and we have organizers across the country and everything, we're about to scale up in a major way. Singles of events about to turn into doubles of dozens of events and then eventually hopefully hundreds of them at the same time. But all of that comes from the idea of reaching people where they are in this one thing we already agree on and possibly bringing them into the greater liberty movement as a result. Yeah. And the worst case scenario, if that person says, you know what, I'm glad that you worked with me on this, but I'm still a communist or a Republican or but I repeat myself, whatever they say they are. Okay, great. We just leverage one of our political opponents to accomplish something.
Yes.
If nothing else, that's literally the worst case scenario is we took our enemies, our political enemies, and used them to accomplish something that we all agreed on. Yeah. And of course, best case scenario is we turn them into libertarians. Right. The somewhat in between scenario is that they're at least that much more open to our ideas. Even if they don't fully buy into it, they at least understand us as good actors. Yeah. We've softened their perception. Like you said, it's no longer, libertarians no longer this abstract idea or this tweet they didn't like or this tweet they did like or whatever. Right. It's you. It's Mike, it's Spike, it's whomever they've been working on that thing. So that's really the motivation behind what we're doing with You Are the Power. And it's already been incredible the work we've been able to do. And the beauty of building a culture of liberty is that if the Libertarian Party, as a result, becomes the main party in this country, or if the Republican and Democrat Party do such a great job of, co-opting our ideas that the Libertarian Party isn't even needed, or some other party rises out of the ashes comes from out of nowhere, John Cena style, and takes over everything. If the people are crying out and demanding freedom and won't rest until they get it, then we're going back to what James Madison said. Yeah. And we're going back to what Lysander Spooner said before he became an anarchist. And we're going back to, frankly, what Benjamin Franklin said, which, at the time of the ratification, that sure, sure, this might work for a time, but if we aren't constantly vigilant, then we're going to end up with something worse than what we just replaced. Yes. When Jefferson talked about the tree of liberty, we're going back to what the founders and everyone who was worth a salt since then said, that we have to be ever vigilant for our freedoms and our liberties, whatever system we live under. And that's what I'm doing. That's what the 10th Amendment Center is doing. And hopefully that's what everyone listening to this is doing. It's about building a culture and fighting for it.
Awesome. That is a good place to end. We will link to your stuff on the show notes page. If you've got a few more minutes, I would love to do what we call the mudslide round with you, which is just for the listeners, for my supporters. And but I do appreciate you taking some time. And finally, we were going to do this a couple of weeks ago, and then we had to have a hurricane. So
and both of us did. It was like a roundhouse hurricane. Right. It hit you first, and then it hit me after that. So I would be happy to do that. And I'm the after show thing, and I love this opportunity to talk with you, Mike. And thanks everyone for tuning into GodArchy.
Yeah, thank you. All right. Well, I hope you enjoyed that chat with Spike. I was really impressed with a lot of things he said. And again, as I mentioned before, I ran the interview, I found that we're really on the same page about a lot of things. So it was really cool talking to him and getting his perspective. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did, as much as I enjoyed interviewing him. So with that, we're going to wrap up the show for this week. Again, go to GodArchy.org and support GodArchy. Click that support button and visit GodArchy.org. Sign up for the email. Do all of those things. And I've got some exciting news also. I'm going to tease you because I'm not going to tell you what it is. But here in the next few weeks, we're going to be doing something pretty cool with the GodArchy podcast. And I think it's going to help grow the show, expand our reach, and I think you'll like it. So with that tease, I'll talk to you again in a couple of weeks. Peace. All right, it's time for the ending stuff. Again, thank you so much for listening to the show. Make sure you check out the website, GodArchy.org. You can sign up to our email list there. We're also on social media, on Facebook, @GodArchy.org. We're on the Twitters, @GodArchy. And you can also find us on MeWe. Just look for GodArchy. If you want to contact me, shoot me an email, info@GodArchy.org. And of course, you can support the show. Just go to GodArchy.org, hit the Support GodArchy button, follow the instructions. Again, we really value your listenership. That's all. There's no more. Just listen to the music.
Really